Hello everyone, welcome. Today we are going to be going through my top 10 favourite fantasy series ever. This is kind of an updated version because back in 2023 I did a best books of all time, my favourite books spanning all genres, it wasn't just fantasy. So I really thought it was time for an update because I haven't spoken to you guys in a long time. I've been very creatively stuck in terms of YouTube because I really want to do video essays, but I'm thinking that I just need to take a step back, go back to the basics because for God's sake, I'm Books with LK. So why am I not making book recommendation videos? Hello. So without further ado, let's get into it. The top 10. This is in order, by the way, a very particular order. I have actually been able to list my faves, and let's be real, they probably switch around quite often, but I think my top 3 to 5 are very set. So let's get into it. In the number 10 spot, we have the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy. That is Daughter of Smoke and Bone, Days of Blood and Starlight, and Dreams of Gods and Monsters. There are loads of covers to these books. I think they kind of did like a bit of a rebrand for them, like not long ago, and I got mine at an op shop, so mine are sort of all over the place. So the premise of this book, the tagline, is once upon a time an angel and a demon fell in love. It did not end well. Like, hello. So this book revolves around a human girl living in the human world, and her name is Karu, but she was raised by chimera who live in another world that can be only accessed through a portal, and these chimera that she works with basically demand teeth from her in exchange for wishes, and she goes back into the human world, gets the teeth for them, and brings it back. So it's a multiverse fantasy that sees our main character get thrown into this magical world, and so naturally Karu meets a tortured, broken angel who is on the other side of this war and falls in love with him, and his name is Akiva. And I know what you're thinking. 17-year-old main character falling in love with immortal love interest? Disgusting. However, without revealing too much, I can say to you that there is a really great twist in this book that kind of flips the concept of that on its head, and I can't say any more without spoiling it, but just so you know, if that's what is dissuading you from reading this book, don't let it. Don't let it. I love the main character in this book. She goes through a lot, but she develops so nicely, and she's strong in lots of ways that aren't just physically, and her romantic relationship isn't a big part of the story in books 2 and 3, which I like. I mean, obviously she's thinking about it a lot, but the fantasy elements are balanced really well with the romantic side of things. And on the fantasy elements, they are so incredibly unique. The writing of this book is so fantastic and fairy tale-like, and I've never read a book that captures the feeling and atmosphere like Laini Taylor does. Her writing is just so different and unique. So if you like portal fantasy and magical realms colliding, then you will absolutely love this. In 9th spot, we have the Folk of the Air trilogy. That is The Cruel Prince, The Wicked King, and The Queen of Nothing. You know something really sad about growing up? Growing out of your favorite series that you loved so dearly when you were a teenager or a child, and realizing that it just doesn't hit the same for you as an adult. The Cruel Prince, however, will always be one of my favorite fantasy trilogies, and I like to believe that it will live through the test of time. This series is about a young woman named Jude who is taken from her human family and now lives in the magical world of the Fae, with all these immortal magical creatures who are often trying to kill her. Throughout the trilogy, she goes from trying to stay alive to a quest for power. And this was the first book I'd read really that focused a lot on political and courtly intrigue, and I loved that it had a female main character who was absolutely dogged in her pursuit for what she wanted. Also, she wields a sword. And what more could you want? Jude is also dealing with her feelings for a certain prince named Carden, and I probably will get in trouble if I call this an enemies to lovers book because I think the average reader thinks that there's not enough romance in this to call it enemies to lovers, but I loved it. If you are someone who likes a smidge of romance in their books, this list, my list, will be perfect because I'm someone that doesn't like a lot of romance because I really like when the moments that you get are sparse and few throughout the trilogy, but because of that, they are so tense and spicy. Not like sex spicy, like I'm on the edge of my seat spicy, like this is so good. So Jude and Carden, for that reason, have a very special place in my heart because the main focus of the book is Jude, and period, it should be that way. But it's very much he's the damsel in distress, so it really flips that trope, and I love that. Number 8 is the Broken Earth trilogy, which is the 5th season, The Obelisk Gate, and The Stone Sky. I don't think I've ever read a fantasy trilogy that changes its structure so drastically over the course of the series, but it's still so consistent in terms of quality. I loved each of these books for very different reasons, and they're very different from each other. So we are living in this post-apocalyptic world on this supercontinent that's in this cycle of near world-ending natural disasters. Our main characters are controlled and oppressed by an empire that relies on their ability to draw power from nature and the earth itself. And yes, this series really throws you in the deep end and lets you figure out a lot of the world building / scientific stuff for yourself, but I think that's half the fun, because the work that you need to put in to understand what's going on means the payoff is so worth it. The 5th season has split storylines. There's a second person perspective in there and a really good twist at the end. The Obelisk Gate is more of your classic fantasy storyline where tensions build and then there's a final battle at the end, but they all manage to still be very character focused while there's so much going on at the same time. And the Stone Sky is a mesh of the two. It has this dual storyline in the present while also flipping back in time to fill our knowledge gaps. But underneath it all is just a person trying to survive and figure out their place in the world. And as always in dystopian series, my favorite part is the exploration of the lengths that humanity will go to survive. Motherhood and the relationship between mother and daughter is also a massive part of the series, which I really love. And that comes with a lot of really tragic and heavy themes like slavery, prejudice, climate change, personal identity, the power of storytelling and passing on histories to the next generation. But it amazed me how much heat Jamieson could pack into 3 books that aren't necessarily that long, and how she can say so much without saying much at all. If you are someone who annotates, you will need your pen out for this book because the one-liners are genuinely incredible and very, very relevant to today's society. In my number 7 spot, I'm putting the Locked Tomb series, which is made up of Gideon the Ninth, Harrow the Ninth, and Nona the Ninth. I've just finished Nona the Ninth, so this one is very fresh in my head. I loved it a little bit less than Gideon and Harrow, but that is still an incredible feat because of how much I loved Gideon and Harrow. Reading this series was one of the best reading experiences I've ever had, and I'll be chasing that feeling probably forever. A quick summary: this is a fantasy story set in space, and our society is split into 9 houses, and basically the story follows one necromancer and one warrior from each of these houses coming together to compete and rise above their rivals to see who is the best necromancer of all of them, while also solving mysteries that often involve murder. Now, the important thing with this series, and it's a good thing it comes after the 5th season because this one is similar in terms of confusion levels, each book of this series is essentially told by the person who knows the least about what is going on. If you are someone who does not like being thrown in the deep end with the world building and doesn't have the patience to treat a book kind of like it's a puzzle to be solved, which fair enough, I'm not judging at all, this series probably isn't for you. But if you love getting attached to characters, these characters have some of the most vivid personalities I've ever read. Their voices, the style that Tamsin Muir uses to portray them is so unique. It's so strongly them. Like, I could pick Gideon's voice if there was nothing identifiable on that page, just a page of her inner consciousness, I would know that it is her, if that makes sense. And I can't say that, my dog's just saying hi right now, I can't say that about most books. Because of how different the characters are from each other, the tone, structure, and themes explored in each book are quite different. So like I said, Gideon is almost detective fiction in a way, with all the mystery in it, and it looks a lot at love and redemption and sacrifice. And Harrow the Ninth carries those overarching themes, but it also focuses in a lot on mental health in terms of grief and guilt, and it also includes a second person perspective. Have fun figuring that one out. Nona has a coming of age feel to it and has some really interesting things to say about religion and identity. Following on from what I said about confusion, this series almost demands a reread, if not multiple. Also, if you are from New Zealand or Australia, you are going to have like an extra level of fun in these books because these jokes are specifically aimed at you. Never in my life did I ever think I was going to be reading a book, especially fantasy, where Melbourne's tram system was mentioned. In the number 6 spot, we have the Daevabad trilogy, which is the City of Brass, the Kingdom of Copper, and the Empire of Gold. The Daevabad trilogy is also one of the newer entries on this list. This series is about a human woman named Nari who is thrown into this magical world with all these magical creatures and beings and tyrannical rulers and warring factions and families, and she has to try and make sense of her role in the story as a royal healer. We also follow a prince named Ali, who is the younger brother to the heir, and he's also trying to make sense of his place in the world and whether he truly believes in what he's fighting for and what side he's going to take in the impending war of his kind. I wasn't the biggest fan of the start of City of Brass because our main characters are quite passive in their adventures. They're quite young, they're understandably naive, and it takes a lot of time to set this world up because the historical and political intricacies of this world, it takes time to build your knowledge base of that. But this world is worth it, okay? It is epic. There's also a bunch of side characters like the siblings who are absolutely fantastic to read about, and the plot, especially the ending, that was what made me continue because I was like, sorry, what? How do we get to this? Made it so worth it. And now when I tell you I was not expecting the 5-star roller coaster that is the Kingdom of Copper, that book blew me out of the water. Firstly, because of the setup and the pacing, I don't think I've ever been so hyped for a final battle, and it did not disappoint because our characters are deeply changed by the events of the first book, and now they are fully kind of coming into their positions and they become more active in the political game of this immersive world. There's also another perspective added in the last 2 books, which makes a huge difference because 3 POVs is really a sweet spot for me. Like, I felt like all the characters could be fleshed out and everyone's storyline had its time to breathe without feeling rushed or underdeveloped. The Empire of Gold was also 5 stars. I said before, I don't like too much romance. This one had a smidge. When I tell you I was squealing, it was so good. The wait is worth it for that tension, okay? The ending is also beautiful. It's super satisfying. It hurt, but not too much. Like, a lot of the book series on this list are absolutely heartbreaking. A lot of adult fantasy series really like to shatter my heart. This one did, but not like to the point where I couldn't put it back together. It was just perfect. Absolutely love this series. In number 5 spot, we have the Poppy War trilogy, which of course is the Poppy War, the Dragon Republic, and the Burning God. I've said this on my book talk recently, this series will go down as one of my favorite book series ever that I will never touch or reread again. And if for some reason I do ever get the urge to reread these books, someone needs to slap me, because why would I actually put myself through that again? Like, why? This series is told solely from the perspective of a girl named Rin who is accepted into a military academy, and she's training there while there's also this impending war on the horizon, and they're worried about a neighboring nation invading her own. As you could probably tell from that description, the Poppy War trilogy is a painful one. It's got a lot of real-world history that inspired it, including the Second Sino-Japanese War, which is extremely brutal and dark, so I strongly recommend reading up on the trigger warnings about this and going into these books with a lot of caution. I had no idea about the realities of what happened during these wars, so it was an eye-opening experience, but definitely not one I recommend going through if you can't handle it. Now, Rin is a war orphan who, when she has her mind set to something, she will do absolutely everything and anything to achieve it, and at the academy, along with her martial arts and military training, she also finds that she has an apt for calling down the power of the gods. These books are messy, they have a lot of death, a lot of betrayal that hits you where it really hurts, and if there is a moment of happiness, that is instantly ripped away from you. Honestly, to the point where you spiral and never want to trust any author again. But on a serious note, this was one of the first books I'd ever read where a character goes through so much that they become what should be defined as a villain, but because you can see all the things that got them to that point and why they are the way that they are, you just can't view them like that. It's just not as simple as that. One of the shining lights of this book is the friendship group. There's some really interesting power dynamics in there that are really cool to read about, and that magic system that I mentioned about the gods is also a big highlight. In our number 4 spot, we have A Song of Ice and Fire, which is obviously a Game of Thrones, a Clash of Kings, a Storm of Swords, a Feast for Crows, and a Dance with Dragons. If there was no book series on this list that had dragons in it, I would consider it not representative of my taste or my personality whatsoever. I'm a Daenerys Targaryen, Sansa Stark, Catelyn Stark defender till the day I die. My favorite character is Jon Snow. If you don't like any of the above, see ya, I will fight you. Probably not, but anyway. I read these books from like May of 2023 to maybe September of last year, 2024, and they've been with me through a lot. I took them to Thailand, they were with me in my holiday in Europe. They hold a very special place in my heart. I read them after I watched the show, so you can imagine how happy I was when I was reading A Feast for Crows and A Dance with Dragons. It's easily my favorite fantasy world. It is just so extensive and impressive, the amount of lore that George R. R. Martin has been able to create. My favorite book in the series is A Storm of Swords because I feel like all the conflicts just peak and then explode in everyone's faces. I think my least favorite is A Feast for Crows, but that doesn't mean that I don't like it at all. I feel like I still love the Sansa, the Brienne, the Jaime, the Cersei chapters. So I genuinely hope that Martin has some sort of plan to release the ending of this book because I feel like it would just be a heartbreaking thing to leave it unfinished because of how many people's lives it's touched. Now we are down to our top 3. In number 3 spot is the Greenbone saga, which is Jade City, Jade War, and Jade Legacy. Now this trilogy is very special for its own reason. It has achieved an incredible feat. It is the only series on this list that my entire family has also read. My mum, my dad, and my sister. They have read it and loved it, which is actually incredible because my sister, we have very similar tastes, but she is the kind of person that will DNF so quickly. So for her to finish a series, I know it's good. My mum also stayed up late for about 2 weeks trying to finish the last 2 books. So yeah, this recommendation is peer-reviewed. It's an urban gangster fantasy set in an Asian-inspired metropolis, and it revolves around a family called the Calls, primarily 3 siblings and 1 adopted younger cousin. The Call family are the leaders of the No Peak clan, and they have been at war with another clan called the Mountain for decades. We get to see how this conflict plays out throughout the trilogy and watch the siblings try and deal with the responsibilities and the expectations that the leadership of the clan puts on them. And in this world, there is a gem called Jade, and it allows its wearer to enhance their natural abilities and become sort of superhuman, and everyone wants control over it. Everyone's always fighting over it. I fell in love with this trilogy because of how far from perfect the characters are. Like, you will hate all of them at some point in this series for doing something despicable. But Fonda Lee never forces you to accept them as a hero or a villain. They are just presented as they are, and then you can make up your own mind about it. These books will tear your heart out. They do not pull their punches. They are relentlessly consistent in their quality. I feel like they're all just so high. And in terms of quality and in terms of picking a favorite, I would have to say Jade War, but only just. And I think that's because it has the most variety in terms of character development and also action and the political / business maneuvering of the clan. Because there's a lot of strategy and money-making moves. Like, that's primarily what the books revolve around. And while you're watching them trying to decimate the Mountain Clan, it's also really nice to watch these characters grow up and then watch their children grow up, because I think the final book spans over at least a decade. So it is a whirlwind of a journey. Number 2. The Six of Crows duology. Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom. It is no secret that I love this duology. I'm very passionate about these characters and the way that Netflix portrayed them on screen, so if you haven't watched my Shadow and Bone video essay, you are more than welcome to after this video. One word: heists. I love fantasy heists, and this book helped me discover that. And I also love the Grishaverse, especially the magic system. It's really expanded upon in Six of Crows with the existence of a drug that actually enhances the natural abilities of the Grisha to make them superhuman, but it also makes them addicted to it. If you don't know Six of Crows, it's basically about 6 teenagers who belong to a criminal gang because of various traumatic experiences that led them there. They're offered a job with a reward that they cannot pass up and have to break into the impenetrable ice court to steal a scientist while trying to get along, because they all have very different motivations and allegiances. As I said, I love these characters so much, and I think it's a testament to Leigh Bardugo's writing that she allows us to get to know 6 characters so intimately in just 2 books. Every time I reread them, I'm just in awe about how quickly I get attached to these characters again and how I just fall back into the world. You will be emotionally attached to this crew, I guarantee you. This and the next series I'm going to mention also has characters that are hell-bent on revenge. And I love a good revenge story when nobody holds back and decides to be the better person. Please be awful. Please just give them what they deserve. And in our number 1 spot, what will become the Villains trilogy, but is at the moment just Vicious and Vengeful. Specifically, Vicious is the top. Vicious, number 1, I think. I think my favorite book of all time is Vicious. We'll talk about Vengeful in a minute, okay? I read Vicious based on a recommendation from my sister, who read it in a few hours, and then I subsequently read it in one night. So this series follows our 2 main characters, Victor and Eli, who in the past timeline are friends in college and figure out a way to give themselves superpowers. In the present timeline, they are mortal enemies who are on the complete opposite side to the moral debate of whether EOs, which are the extraordinaries, the people who have superpowers, whether they deserve to exist. So one is trying to exterminate the EOs, while the other one is trying to protect them / exterminate the one who's trying to do the exterminating. You get the picture. The chapters are structured with time-related headings, so it's like 9 days before or 6 years before, and I feel like you have no other option with these books. You just have to keep reading to find out what it is that it's like before. The complex, dark dynamic between Victor and Eli is one of my favorite, maybe my favorite relationship in fiction. You never know what either of them is going to do next, and even better, their powers complement each other in this way that makes the story so much more complex and difficult for them on the exterminating side of things. I guarantee you'll also get very attached to the side characters who have perspectives themselves, and they're the people that Victor takes under his wing / recruits. Now the second book, Vengeful. It is not on the level that Vicious is. I think Vicious honestly works really well as a standalone. However, do I care? No. all I want is more Eli and Victor content, and I'm getting my wish because Victorious is being written by V.E. Schwab right now, and I believe she wants to get it out next year. So I'm getting more Victor and Eli content, and that's all I care about. So that is currently my top 10 favorite fantasy book series list. Let me know if you'd like me to do fantasy standalones, because I definitely have a few books there that I'd love to talk about. Thanks so much for watching. If you're still here, thank you so much for sticking around, and I really appreciate you clicking on my video. And let me know what your favorite fantasy book series are in the comments below.